All right, we're live. Yay. Hello, and thank you everyone for joining us for this short fiction panel. I'm Carter. I use they, them pronouns, and I am the event coordinator here at Astoria Bookshop, the bookshop hosting this event. If you don't know who we are because you found us through the magic of the internet, we are a bookshop in Astoria, Queens. And yes, if you click that link down in the bottom, we will ship the book to you wherever you are. So if you are considering buying a book tonight from any of these fantastic authors, that link will be down there all night. You're welcome to click it. You can also go and pick up a book after the event, up to you. So before we get things started, I want to go through just a couple of housekeeping things. You will have the opportunity to ask questions during the last 15 minutes of this. If you have questions throughout, put them in the Ask a Question function, which is a little button down at the bottom that says Ask a Question. You can chat with each other over on the right over there. But we will kick you out if you participate in any trolling or any racial, ethnic, or homophobic slurs. We basically are asking you all to be respectful towards one another. And now just to kick things off, I am going to turn it over to the authors to introduce themselves, maybe go over just things they have written, and to read a short bit of their writing. So we'll go Beth, Eugene, Chris, Sarah, and Beth, why don't you kick things off for us?
Okay. Hi, I'm Beth Gilstrap. I am coming to you from Louisville, Kentucky. I'm probably the only one not in New York right now. So thank you for having me in Astoria Bookshop, Carter. And I'm thrilled to be sharing space with Sarah, Chris, and Eugene. I mostly write short fiction. I do write some essays, though they are much harder on me than writing fiction. And I have a new book out called Deadheading and Other Stories. It came out on the 5th, and it won the Women's Prose Prize for 2019 at Red Hen Press. I'm going to read one of my all-time favorite flash fiction pieces that is in this book. It originally appeared in Cheap Pop, shout out to Robert James Russell and crew, and it is called A Five-Pointed Failed Paper Love Weapon. You wear your hair down and your brother's jeans, the day the only boy you date freshman year staples himself in the chest. You are still sticky from gym because you can never bring yourself to shower in front of people, but you hope the perfume you stole masks the odor. You blot your cheeks, nose, and chin before you see him on the path to yearbook. He's everything your girlfriends told you to want. Black hair hanging over one eye, patches on a moto jacket, tight-rolled jeans, messed up like you. You try to speak to the boy, to tell him you want to take his boots home to your room, to eat, to put your forefinger on his eyelids and absorb the image you know can't be unseen, the one of his friend hanging by a chain from a dogwood, to tell him how the gravel sound of his voice makes something in your hip bones crack, how the pain in your chest at night after he finally hangs up must make you the youngest person in the world who suffers heart attacks. But all you can do is touch his skull earring, ask where he got it. As he leans you up against the locker, you notice the dust mop smell of the hallway, doors clicking closed, and a few straggling runners trying to make it to class. You are late. You squirm away and dig a knuckle into your sternum. He pulls his own hair. Fine, whatever. I thought you loved me. You try to give him the love letter you folded into a star, but he flicks your arm away, sending it sailing to the floor, a failed paper love weapon you lift off the linoleum by 2 of its 5 points. In yearbook, you cut pictures and wax them onto mock-up pages, candid shots of Emily and Allison and Farah, all branded up like race car drivers and lording over each other. No one's permission ever granted or given to separate. An image of the math nerds lined up eating bag lunches on the floor at the back of the cafeteria. The full page in memoriam for his friend's suicide, his parents said, was an accident. You snip open your palm and watch your own blood bead. When you see him again after school, he is halfway to his car. You run, your backpack thumping so hard it hurts your shoulders. Wait for me, the girl who knows how to bruise herself. He turns after he unlocks his car door. On the white lettering of his Black Flag t-shirt, red spots soak through, spaced the width of staples. 17 staples equal 34 holes. You ask what's wrong. He says, "You don't love me." So many times the words become nothing but moan. You reach in through the window, touch his knee and take a cigarette from the dash, leaning over him to light it. You take a drag and lean back against his car door. Without looking back at him, you smoke your cigarette like you have nothing else to do. The Emilys and Farahs are waiting. When you finish, he passes you an empty Coke can for the butt and tells you to get in the car. Before he drops you home, he pulls off into an adjacent field. Amid swaying weeds and broken bottles, you kiss all 34 of his wounds, wishing he were the first or the last violent man in your life. And that's the end. Thank you.
Okay, I'll go next. Thank you to, that was great. It really was provocative and violent. that beautiful teenage moment. Thanks to Astoria Bookshop and Carter. It's a pleasure to be here with Beth, Christopher, and Sarah. I'm a writer. My latest novel is called Search History, and I'm only occasionally a writer of short fiction, but I'm excited to be here and talk and learn about the form. I'm going to read just 3 flash fictions. The first isn't my own, but is one I've always loved, on occasion may have emulated, and I thought also it might provoke some reactions. And in any case, I wanted to read it. It's by Kafka, translated by Willa and Edwin Muir. It's called The Next Village. All 3 pieces are very short. The Next Village. My grandfather used to say, "Life is astoundingly short. To me, looking back over it, life seems so foreshortened that I scarcely understand, for instance, how a young man can decide to ride over to the next village without being afraid that, not to mention accidents, even the span of a normal, happy life may fall far short of the time needed for such a journey." That was the first one. This second is a short of mine from 2009, which I hope might be worth revisiting, particularly in the virtual environment in which we are all meeting. It's called The Parable of Our Giant. Once upon a time, all our nerves are intertwined, and we react to pain and joy, gross stimulus, in coordinated, gross ways. So we think we are connected in almost one organism. Gradually, our nerves disentangle, and we sit in the middle of empty rooms. Small portholes, or perhaps round desert mirrors, allow us fleeting glimpses of others in identical cells. Then we each notice a trapdoor beneath us, and crawling through it, find a giant controlled by the sum of all our thoughts. I can't bid the giant do my individual will, but feel some relief to discover another unity, one without control. We all hover at our hatches between the world of the one giant body and our lonely but familiar selves, seemingly paralyzed. And one more, this last one I wrote recently, as the title indicates, but near the early part of the quarantine in April, and it's called Corona. I wrote a COVID fiction. Here it is. It's a science fiction story premise. A man creates a Twitter feed where he says he will predict an occurrence for each tomorrow. These will be predictions of little to no consequence, but ones improbable to get consistently right. For example, the rainfall in Duluth, or the number of piglets born at a mid-sized petting zoo in West Texas, or the number of parking tickets given that day by noon in a Cincinnati precinct. The feed commences, and day after day, it predicts accurately. Who is this account owner? Journalists find him. There is nothing particularly unique about him. He types something that comes to him, he says. He just had one day the utter confidence he could do this. The press becomes weary of this character and his story, however unusual and miraculous its daily fact. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing those, Eugene. The fact that you were able to write that at the start of COVID is really impressive to me, a person who has not been able to write very much. But those were really 3 great pieces. Hi, everyone. I'm Chris. I'm excited to be out here with Sara, Eugene, and Beth to celebrate Beth's deadheading and just to talk short fiction. My debut collection, I'm Not Hungry But I Can Eat, comes out later this year in December. It's my first book, and I'm excited and scared. I'm going to read for you all a flash called A Mountain of Invertebrates, which originally published in Lunch Ticket and is in my forthcoming collection. Austin orders an entire seafood boil for himself. He ignores the crawfish and halved cobs of corn, focusing instead on the crab legs, which he cracks open with such force the buttery juices missed Jorge's face. Jorge's plate is nearly empty now. He had devoured his crispy fried cod sandwich in 5 minutes and spends the rest of their meal together picking at coleslaw, catching only 2 or 3 strands of wet cabbage at a time on his fork. Austin finishes a 4th crab leg and leans back in his chair. He drapes a napkin over his lap. That was delightful, he says, but I can't eat another bite. Austin smiles at Jorge, his teeth flecked with parsley. You should try some, he says. But seafood is not Jorge's thing. The ocean, he believes, is swarming with aliens. No need to search for them in outer space when they lurk in the darkest depths of the earth. And certainly no reason to eat them. To roll the aquatic flesh around in his mouth would be an act against God. Hard pass, he thinks. But there was still so much shrimp and sausage and crawfish and potatoes cooling out on the newspaper tabletop. He imagines biting into the untouched crawfish now. Some uneasy chewing to start, then a rough swallow. Then, he suspects, the dead little fucker would be revived by the bath of his stomach acid. Reborn, it would swim down, deeper into his gut, burrowing itself within him forever. Jorge, you really must try some, Austin says again. Just 1 bite, please. He grabs a lobster from the pile, twists its body, and pulls until the tail separates from its torso. They could get a to-go container. There's still time. It's what other couples might do. Wrap up the remains and tote the bounty back to Jorge's apartment to be later consumed in a post-sex haze. That never happens, does it? Jorge sees into next morning, and he knows Austin would leave the bag in his fridge, as he had done with a slice of vodka pizza from their first date, and the stuffed cabbage from date 2, and the Thai food from the 3rd. The chocolate cake from date 4 never made it home, but for all those other leftovers, Jorge made sure to eat them. He was raised to be a garbage disposal. No waste, ever. He picks over whatever Austin leaves in the mornings, shortly after Austin vanishes into the backseat of a Lyft. Off to class or work, Austin says. Alone in his kitchen, scraping his fork against the aluminum takeout container, Jorge watches the Lyft app every time, notes how the driver passes Austin's job and the school and even his apartment. Jorge watches Austin slip away, upstream. Austin is squeezing the lobster's torso now, and the red shell compresses under his fingers, cracking. Juice rains down over the newspaper. From the carnage, Austin presents Jorge with a lump of yellowish-green meat pulp, balanced delicately on his fingertips. That's it, Jorge laughs. He has to. Everything feels too wild. So much effort and mess. All of that for so little? He's serious. He's confused. You'll see what all the fuss is about, Austin says. He swears it, raises the mask to Jorge's face. Jorge thinks about the bag of seafood, how it will surely sag, the paper thinning out over time, long after the night, eventually breaking open all over his bottom shelf. Rancid garlic butter everywhere, and a mountain of invertebrates left to rot. Jorge opens his mouth, welcomes Austin's fingers. He rolls the meat on his tongue, fights against the stinging in his eyes and rising bile in his throat, tries to push through. Austin is a wide smile and 2 celebratory balled fists. So good, right? He gasps. I knew you'd love it. But Jorge is still chewing the lobster, nodding his head over and over again. The hope is the movement will guide the sea bug down his throat, and he can will himself into saying this thing is good. The hope is it won't be a lie. Thank you.
Wow, Chris, that was amazing. Oh my God. Oh my God. Yes, that made my day. I cannot wait for your collection. That is just fantastic. Yeah, I'm Sara Lippmann. Hi, everybody. gosh, it's really hard to go last. I'm still debating in the last minute what the heck I'm going to read for you tonight. But yeah, I write mostly fiction, mostly short fiction. Sometimes I write novels, but the truth is I haven't written anything for a while. But I'm so excited to celebrate Beth's beautiful book, which I've been reading, and Chris's brilliance, and Eugene's novel, which I desperately need and will be getting direct through Astoria Books tonight. And thanks to Carter, of course, for graciously hosting us. So I don't know. I guess I'll read from I have a book coming out in March. It's a collection of short stories. And I guess I'll read from one of them. Actually, you know what? Screw that. I'm going to do something scary. I'm going to read from, I have a novel coming out in September, and I'm going to do something really scary and read a page from my novel. Because why not? Hope it's a safe space. I'll read from my novel tonight, which is called Lech. It's coming out in September. It's about, oh God, what do you need to know? It's about the potential sale of a property in the Catskills in the pre-Trump summer of 2014, and the fallout in the lives of various players, local, transplant, visitor. It's told through 4 different points of view, but I just added a 5th. So I'm going to read a page from this 5th point of view, which, to give you any context, the property in question contains a private pond in which 25 years prior to the opening of the novel, a religious Jewish woman drowned in. And this section is, section I'm going to choose for you if I can pull up my file, is narrated from her her surviving adult son, and his name is Svi, which means deer, but that's not the name that was given to him. Oh, and I need my glasses. Okay. Anyway, this is his first section. Up in the Catskills. Svi. How he's ended up here on everyone's speed dial, rolling bones in a converted barn, is both long and short. The short is, it's a summer gig. He's got couches in Williamsburg to crash on through winter. The short is, he's got cash but no urge to settle. The short is, people find each other, and he's found a lost few. And if they can stick together, that will make all the difference, if only for his mother, Chaya Block, of blessed memory. No one told him, but he knows. His mother had been trying to leave. He knows this like he knows the warm smell of wool, a static heat that makes his nose itch. He was 3 when she died. How dare you tarnish your mama's memory, his father says, but 3 is not too young to remember. Herschel is his given name, consecrated by his father, who hasn't called him in ages. A year after she drowned, his tata remarried, had kids, 6 on top of 4, but it's superstitious to count, hard to keep track. Of the original children, Svi is the middle, first one estranged, last one forgiven. Still, his mother comes, a mist in the air, in the outline of strangers. He'll make eye contact and his lids will water. It's not like seeing a ghost. His mama is no Dybbuk, but an aura. He does not need to be high to feel it, to feel her. Makes no sense, but then what does? The long of it is more tangled and confusing. It trips him up. Svi still clings to the rituals into which he was born out of habit, as an insurance policy to ground him in all that's unknown. He's been told not to question. There are blessings for everything. He unclips his phone from his belt, lays it on the table beside a sandwich of bills. Again, he washes. Right hand, right, left, returns his 2-handled cup beneath his bed, his beard trim, his payas twisted yet tucked, allowing him to keep one foot in each world. Like this, he passes. Trouble has always followed. Maybe it began when his mother's immodest body was found, when his tata found a new bride, when his siblings arrived, when they all squeezed into one room, when they shared 3 to a bed. Maybe it was when Freya got burned, his younger sister, the baby, hot oil dissolving the skin on her limbs when a pot tipped over on Shabbos. The hand of God, in Etzi Hashem, as if it weren't a case of no one paying attention. Who would marry her now? When one rabbi had enough of him, he bounced from yeshiva to yeshiva. No one could touch him. His first sin, empanadas. Then fried shrimp. Zvi removes his kippah for treif, but the rest of the time he keeps his head covering on, even beneath a baseball hat, even when dealing, which is nothing more than a business transaction. He is servicing a need. Better him than his shagets. Despite his crisis of faith, despite what happened to his mother, the Satmar community is his link to her. 3 times a day he prays, that is, he moves his lips. Like the secular world with their lyrics to American Pie, the song comes on, and without thinking, you sing it. Thanks.
Thank you all so much for reading and introducing yourselves. Those were some amazing pieces, so I really appreciate you all taking the time to read. So we're going to head into some questions that I have prepared for our panel here, but I want to remind you that there is that Q&A option, and honestly, if your questions end up being better than mine, I might just switch them in sooner than later. So let's kick things off, though. I would love to hear from each of you about like what appeals to you most about this short fiction form. Christopher, do you want to start off? And then we can go Chris, Sarah, Eugene, Beth. I'm just mixing things up, so.
Yeah, sure. That's a really great question. I feel like as a reader, I sort of love how short fiction can contain a whole world or a whole lifespan of a character in a very like compressed form, and that's even like more true in like flash fiction. And I guess as a writer, for me, short fiction is all about sort of like excavating and like getting deeper to the bone. And I enjoy the sort of like how meticulous I can be on the sentence level, which in longer works it sort of would never get done with the way I approach, short fiction in that way, right? I guess I enjoy it for like both of those reasons, as a reader and a writer. And yeah.
Sarah, if you have anything to add.
Yeah, no, I mean, I echo that. It's like the whole universe in a grain of sand thing, as a writer, it's, gratifying to sort of get in, get out. And as a reader, absolutely. Like, I love how you are often given the slimmest slice without lengthy context or backstory, and you're dropped into a moment where what we can take from that moment is so much larger. There's like a generosity and an expansiveness, but also an intimacy to the level of compression, as Chris was talking, an urgency and a precision in language that I'll just forever be drawn to. I'll also say it was kind of like reading Jane Ann Phillips as an 18-year-old it was so huge for me, and it made me want to write. So I think I will always just gravitate back towards short fiction as a first love.
Yeah. Eugene, if you have anything to add.
I think very similarly that there's different pressures involved in a short piece, and you have to be very precise, but they're also kind of like interesting different pressures. Like you have to make your beginning crystal clear, you have to, or at least, if not crystal clear, intriguing. So you have to say hello very quickly and kind of show a little something, show a little pizzazz or show a little, generate a little interest. You could not, but I think in a short work, you kind of have to establish something very quickly. And then there are pressures to a form. Like you can either, one professor once told me short stories have to, always end with like a snap or a fade. But sometimes they don't, and I think it's interesting how you construct these moments, and and how that there are these traditional places where a story can come to a closure or come to a pause, but it doesn't have to be that way. You can play around with that. That's and I enjoy those things about short fiction.
Yeah. Beth,
Me too.
Yeah,
sure. Me too. I totally agree with what they're saying about concision, and for me, sort of the way I move through the world, I think I'm naturally more able to write short stories. Part of it is my psychology. I have complex post-traumatic stress disorder. So, and I'm often writing about very heavy subjects, and it is very much I can only be in this for so long without triggering myself. So there's a little bit of my own psychology at play here, but it's also, I think, when you read a beautiful short story, and I'm always and forever a reader and a fan first before I'm a writer, I think they can become incantatory. Something about the image with the language and that concision, it becomes almost like a spiritual experience for me.
Yeah. Kind of in like that same vein of thought, though, you like, especially with the mention of writing shorter fiction and like why that appeals to you. This question I do want to start with Eugene for. What does your writing process look like? And is it different when writing that shorter fiction versus a longer piece, especially since I know you mostly write novels?
Yeah, I think there's rarely intention to go one way or the other. Usually I'm working through, at least in recent times, I'm trying to write forward in the novel. And then sometimes you sit down and nothing comes that's going to be usable for the novel, but something comes that starts something else, and then you do that for a while. So I think when I sit down to work, when I sit down to write, I try to stay open, and sometimes it's a short fiction, and sometimes it's not. And usually I don't orient myself towards short fiction composition, but sometimes that's where it goes.
Yeah. If any of you all have anything to add.
I love that. Are any of the rest of you like super planners, or I do very much the same thing, Eugene. I sit down and it's kind of like whatever shows up that day is what we're dealing with. Are any of you planners?
Not a planner, but
not a very good one.
So you're not storyboarding out your novel or anything like that?
God, no. If only I were, like, if only I knew how to create a novel and a plan, or maybe an outline and a plan, it wouldn't take me a decade of my life, maybe. But I mean, the story collection Jerks came out of, I just kept cheating on this novel that I was quote unquote supposed to be writing. And I just kept cheating because I really believe that, like, we all have sort of a narrative to the extent to which we have sort of a natural narrative sweet spot. I feel much more naturally. I don't know that I'm a natural anything, but like if I'm much more of a story writer. So like the idea of writing a novel was really pushing against that muscle. And so I kept cheating on it with stories, largely because you can kind of like get on top of it and like, wrangle it. And there's something like so kind of rewarding about being able to see the beginning and the end and like delivering it in that way. And I just found it like rigorous, like stimulating in a way that the murky middle of a novel is not at all, or at least not at all for me. So yeah, that's how this collection evolved, was just, because I was transgressing.
I love that. I'm so glad I'm not the only one. How about you, Chris?
Yeah, I often like have an idea. I think for me, when I come to the page, an idea has sort of been percolating for a little bit before I attempt to write it. And so I'm working through it, when I'm taking walks in the shower. And if it hasn't left my head in like 3 months or 6 months or a year, then I'm like, okay, maybe this is the start of a story. And I also gravitate more towards short form. But even when I sit down and start to write this thing that I've been thinking about, it changes on me, and it becomes something that maybe I didn't even anticipate, which is delightful and also frustrating when I'm like, I had it so clear in my head, but now it's sort of its own thing that I don't know, it feels like a Rubik's Cube at some point. Like I have to figure out what it wants me to do and not the other way around. It doesn't have to bend towards me. But so I'm pretty open, but that's why I have so many unfinished drafts, because they become something else that I don't know what to do with. And so I leave it, which I also love about short fiction, is you can kind of abandon it and it doesn't feel like you gave up 10 years of your life for one short story, even if some stories have taken like me 2 years to finish, right? But it feels like I can sort of like, I don't know, sort of like, I like Sarah's idea of like cheating on a novel, but like if short stories are like one night stands, then I can sort of like leave it behind and not think about it if I don't want to.
I love that. So you take walks, Sarah. I know you're a runner, right?
Yeah, I am.
So I walk every day as part of my process. What about you, Eugene? Do you have some kind of meditation or walk? Or
I do both those things. I formally sit meditation and I try to take walks, but honestly, I feel like, well, right now life is so chaotic that it's hard to have a routine, but I think both those things help a lot. Definitely help a lot.
Yeah, I'm amazed by how many writers actually do that. It makes me feel like connected to you when I'm out on my walks, right? I love that.
I think there's something very meditative about walking.
Yeah, I mean, for me too, it's like, you know, you hear these adages like, well, you know, where do you get your writing done? It was like Grace Paley said, I write in the bath, or, you know, you write on the walks. But it really is, it's like this way of getting out of your own way so that you're, I don't know, for me at least, again, for me at least, in all of my neurosis, but like there's a level of self-consciousness that I have when like facing the white page. It feels, you know, so serious to be logging on, like opening my files or what have you, that whatever we can do to sort of separate from that, to kind of reconnect with the playfulness of writing, which is probably why we all started to begin with, that, and then sort of the urgency and sort of to get, and so taking a walk, doing whatever the thing is to kind of separate you from the work is actually when the work kind of happens, I find, you know. So it's that like what Chris was saying before about, you know, the thing that gnaws away at you until you can't ignore it. It's the same thing. It's like that itch. You get that itch, and I mean, I'm so lazy, I sort of ignore it, and half the time I'm so senile that, like, you know, it evaporates, and then I think, okay, either I'm just senile and getting old, or it maybe didn't have that much energy to it, you know, to begin with. But the ones that actually kind of continue to work on you, then you kind of know at some point you can't keep ignoring it, and you're gonna have to write about it.
So true. And then I find that out on those excursions, the universe will offer you up gifts along the way in really weird images and things that you never could have, you know, imagined on your own. At least for me. I mean, you guys are in New York. That has to be the case, right?
I agree, and I was thinking about what Sarah and Christopher were saying, in the sense that you do get something, you know, when you're walking or when you're sitting, you get an idea or some energy, and then you go down the page, and just like Christopher said, it doesn't come out in the same way. And someone told me this, and I think it's true, that the writing happens probably wherever that energy comes from during a meditation walk. That's part of it, but also that the writing happens where the nib of the pen touches the paper, where your fingers touch the keyboard. It's not something that's coming from here to the paper, but it's in the act of however you're doing it, and that's kind of the fun of it. That's kind of the joy of it. But that's where the writing happens. Yeah.
Same.
So, a question for Beth, Christopher, and Sarah. Going into the short story writing process, did you think that you'd be writing a collection, or did you write each piece before the collection was even like a concept to you? Any of you can start.
I can jump in. I had been writing, I think all the stories in the collection sort of were written and or published over like 5 years. So I think in the first 2 to 3 years, I was sort of acclimating myself to like writing and figuring out what it was I wanted to write about. And like, it wasn't until maybe those 3 years of publishing and writing that I sort of like understood what themes I was gravitating towards, how the stories I had been writing sort of connected and spoke with each other, that I decided I wanted to write a collection. And then the 2 years that followed, it was sort of more intentional. So I was sort of like following whims, which were like about, you know, like relationships, friendships, the body, food, my like queerness, and then I got to a point where then I decided that like, okay, I think there's something here, and then I wrote in that direction. And those stories felt like they were coming together a little quicker because I sort of understood what I was doing a little better. Yeah.
I think I was somewhere in between, like what you did this time, Chris, and Sarah, what you did, because I worked on a novel for 5 years about visionary artists, and visionary meaning they claim to be guided by spirits, visual artists. And I'm fascinated by that, but I worked on it for a solid 5 years, got to the murky, frustrating part, and started cheating with stories. And then I just didn't pick it back up. It was like, go sit over there and think about what you've done. And now it's 5 years later and I have a story collection. And it was kind of similar though. You know, I got a certain number of stories and I was like, wait a minute, something's happening with these. They seem to be talking to each other. And then I finished the last 3 or 4 and started shaping it from there.
Yeah, I mean, I told you that I was that this is, you know, I already was cheating, but like once I you know, I was cheating so much that I had all this stuff, and then once I kind of landed on the title, then I started to realize that I had like it was actually cohesive, and there was, you know, again as Chris was talking about, obsession, like you start to see, you know, what's emerging, and you know sometimes what's emerging is totally, you know, you're not aware of it at the time necessarily, but you know we all have to own our own shit, and like those obsessions just, you know, start to really emerge, and you can start to stitch them, and so then it becomes that question, and I'd love to hear from Beth and Chris, but like the question of like, okay, I have a body of work and it's cohesive enough to be a collection, and now how do I build the sort of internal arc of the stories in order so that we have a solid takeaway from the book itself, you know, from these disparate stories. So then it became that question of like what belongs in it, what belongs in the book and what doesn't.
Yeah, that is
No, go for it. What were you gonna say?
Oh no, I think that's a fascinating question that came about at that point when I was like shifting, right? Because I was like, I have all these stories, where can I fill in the blanks? What's missing? Like, what are the thematic links that aren't there that I want there? And then even at the end of that, like looking back and being like, just because I wrote this story, it doesn't necessarily need to be in this collection, which was really a really freeing thing to think. Like, my collection's relatively short, and sort of when I decided that was okay, I was like, I don't need to include any bloat, and like, I can just include the stories I truly feel belong in this collection, which I hope led to a better book.
I wish more writers did that, Chris. I love short books, so I'm excited. Sometimes you wind up with a collection where it's like, well, did we really need to put all these in here? And I'm guilty of it too. I think probably my first book, I cut out some I shouldn't have and left in some I shouldn't have. So, I mean, you know, who knows?
I know we talked briefly on how you go for walks to get ideas and those kind of moments, but do you think there are any ideas that came to you for any of your short stories or even like novels or anything like that that were influenced by something else or someone else? And what would you say that is? Like, would you say a different author, a TV show, that kind of thing? Any of you can start. So, Sarah, would you want to go?
Yeah, I mean, I can talk about influence. I mean, I don't know if we want to talk about literary influence. I can certainly talk about that,
Absolutely.
but because it also ties into sort of the imperative of the story is like, again, maybe I'm showing my age and my ass at the same time, but like I grew up, reading. I mean, I grew up being schooled on like what I like to call like the big white dicks of Richard Yates rather, Salter, Harold Broadkey, Philip Roth, like all those short stories. And like, I say that I was bred on problematic men. But I do feel like my storytelling is somewhat of a response to that. And then of course I got turned on to Mary Gateskill, Tilly Olsen, Grace Paley. But I feel like there's to the, this like sex and rage, and really like my collection in a sense, and I wrote it in the throes of the Trump era as sort of again like this distraction, but I was there's just this like fucked up assumption that that women once they become mothers are like baby vessels or empty vessels, and that like want or desire has been pushed out of us like with the placenta, and so that now we're supposed to live in service to others, and that if we don't, that we're somehow selfish or unseemly, and so like and yet it's so ironic because fucking is what got us in this place to begin with, the mother state, so I think like I was very I think to the extent that I can look back on it, I think that I had a lot of anger about that, and this sort of double standard of male, men are allowed to be sexual beings to the death, but like women, that narrative starts to dwindle. And so I would say that was sort of that imperative, and also sort of like a conversational response to some of the stuff that I'd really been sort of schooled in as a student, as a forever student of writing.
Yeah. I have a lot of similarities with Sara, not from a motherhood perspective, but I was a child of an abusive alcoholic father, and I witnessed a lot of things that no child should witness. And all of the Trump era stuff was very, very triggering, and I had a lot of rage as well, for my mother, for women everywhere. And that comes through a lot in my work. There's a lot of single moms, because though she and I have a troubled relationship, I grew up in the South in the 80s and the 90s, and most of my family, the generations above me and my siblings, have very, very different viewpoints. So there's a lot of complicated angst there that I'm trying to work through, and I think it comes through. I hope it does. So.
Chris or Eugene, one of you?
I don't know if I have a great answer to this question about influence or where things come from, but I do think that there's, like Sara and Beth are saying, kind of these deep reservoirs of emotion, whether it's grief or trauma or, but usually it's some kind of pain. And I think that those things, those crises or that emotion, even in the humor, even in whatever form it takes, it does. I think most writers, but I'll speak for myself. I think that those emotions are the things that kind of are the fuel or the engine that drive whatever else happens.
Chris, if you have anything to add.
I think what everyone's touching upon, Eugene summarized it, but everyone's sort of, I think anger is, like Beth and Sara have described, like is a huge motivator, and like a huge source of like inspiration, untapped rage. Sara and I are in the same writing group, and I think Sara was the first person who said to me directly that you like enjoyed reading like sort of these ragey moments in my fiction, and I think that was like it unlocked something for me, so I'm deeply appreciative of that. But I think it comes from living, personally my life of like, as being someone who's fatter, as being someone who's queer, as being someone who's a person of color, and navigating big spaces for work and college, and sort of always feeling like I had to suppress something. And so in fiction, I was able to like let it go, and even like play with that sort of frustration and that restraint that I felt in my like teen years and early 20s. So that's like a big like source of inspiration, that like that well of emotion, like Eugene said. And then in general, like finding inspiration, I look to other art forms. Like I'm a big musical theater fan, so when it comes to like thinking about emotion and like how to like portray emotion, like I feel like, I don't know, the swell of a song like really is something I latch onto, especially in my flash fiction, right? How to sort of like build up to this climactic like feeling, and so I look to that a lot. And like Sondheim is like my big, like Company is like the musical that inspired, I would say, structure in my collection, and also like even I riffed on it a little in my final story. So yeah, musical theater for me is like a big, like not literary, but like not literary source of inspiration for me.
I love that, Chris. I had a little bit of a theater background myself, but I was behind the scenes because I was too anxious to be in public.
I feel that.
Let's move into some of our Q&A audience questions. Alexander asked, these all feature all of your stories that you read previously, because this question did pop up roughly after that. All of your stories feature memorable voices and narrators. Do you find that while you write, or do you hear it before you begin? Your voices and narrators, that is.
For me, it depends on the story. A lot of times I start with an image and work toward it. Sometimes it comes, I write until I get to that image and it's the end. Sometimes it's the beginning. But sometimes it's a voice. And in the last two stories, the Still Soft, Still Whole, and then Deadheading, that came with Layla's voice first. It was like you guys were saying, if something isn't leaving you alone, it's going, hello. That was Layla. Sometimes you'll wake up, I can wake up and there's a voice there and you're like, who the heck is this? And you're like, okay, well, I'm going to follow you around for a while and see what's going on there.
Yeah, I mean, I'd echo that. I'd say that it's usually voice first for me, 99.9% of the time. And what was strange about the piece that I read tonight was that, as I mentioned, this is just like me and my terrible journey on this novel, but like, I was denying that voice for a long time. It was 4 points of view, like that fifth point of view I just put in this summer. And I think it was kind of like always there. And, I didn't want to go there. I had a lot of, I still have a lot of questions and concerns about like who gets to tell what story. And it's a story, it's a story of a very religious man in a very insular community. And like, can I go there? Do I have the right to go there? And so I really like kind of spent a lot of years telling myself that I'm not going to go there. And then I just fucking went there. So I don't know, but it's usually voice. I mean, when I'm writing short fiction, it's usually I can hear the story before I can see it usually.
Yeah, I think voice for me comes first as well. And especially because rhythm and especially flash, rhythm is very important to me. And I think that goes hand in hand with voice, right? And like, I think relating back to emotion, like if I have an emotion attached to a story that I'm trying to work through, right, I feel like each emotion kind of has its own energy, and that also influences the writing of that piece.
I think in a lot of ways I would agree with what Beth said and what you're all saying, in that sometimes it depends on the piece. But I also think in actuality for me, whether it depends on the piece, whether it's voice or story or but I think that I have been a little bit moving away from not the idea of voice, but some kind of deconstruction of the idea of character. And so I will the voice is important, but often I'll think of style as like, or voice as another color, just like Chris was saying about rhythm and color, and voice. And I would and I will have a voice and have a color, and then I will try to undermine it within the story and see if it can hold up switching. So I hear what you're all saying about voice, and I think about voice, but I sometimes the voice will get too strong, and I think about undercutting it a little sometimes.
I love that idea, and I think that would be something fun to practice and play with too.
Yeah. That's smart.
Yvonne is our next question is from Yvonne, who asked, do you see the end? Are you driving toward it, or is the ending linked to the beginning?
Usually on my first drafts, I have no idea what the ending is. I have no idea what's going on most of the time in first drafts. It's a discovery process for me. So I almost never know the ending because I get bored as a writer if I already know what my ending is. I can have an idea like of how I want the emotion to settle, but I don't have an explicit ending usually. Not in first drafts, no.
I'll either have the ending and nothing else, or like maybe a line. But I think you're absolutely right. The whole thing is a process of discovery.
Yeah, often I will say I think where the question is particularly for flash fiction, or short fiction, maybe not for a novel. Either way, but I feel like I have a loose, again, I don't plan anything, but I have like a loose sense or like a strong, maybe I have like a strong but undefined sense of imperative. And so like, I'm just like chasing down that imperative. So like, I often have this sense of like where I'm driving. But I also think it's really important to kind of like keep that, as Eugene was saying earlier, like keep that channel open, because you don't want like the word, you don't want your story to feel like over determined, and so you're like also like, I don't know, it's like holding two contradictory impulses at the same time. It's like you feel this impulse, but you also have to fight the first impulse because you don't want it to be like, too cut and dry or like too like ta-da punchline, so you're fighting that and keeping open to that. So it often shifts, but I at least with flash fiction, I often can like see the whole. And again, as Chris was saying, there's so many memes about this. It's like the idea and then the reality, and like the chasm between the idea and the reality, right?
Yes.
So like even if I'm chasing down, I think like I'm chasing down what that imperative is, it's often going to look very different than what I have.
I think my favorite is the drawing of the horse. That's my favorite meme, where it's like stick drawing on the end.
Yeah, that's super relatable. Because I think the stories where, and it's again, I think like everyone, it's not my normal mode, but when I have had like that final image in mind and I'm writing toward it, I find that the story as a whole is more difficult to write. And it feels like it's frustrating for the reasons that Sarah says. You don't want it to be too cut and dry, too neat. Overdetermined is a great way to put it. And then I sort of have to like, where's the fun for me in exploring like the twists and turns to get there? So there's still like exploration, but if I'm dead set on it, then I'm just like making myself more and more frustrated in the writing process.
Same. Yeah, same here. I can say too, as an editor, overdetermined is a really great descriptor. And I know Chris edits too. Most of the time I edited a journal called Little Fiction for almost 5 years. And most of the time people wrote at least 2 or 3 paragraphs past where it should have ended. And I'm like, heck. There, that's where it ends. It's much easier to tell in other people's work where it should end than on my own. So
Oof, that's real.
Yeah.
So as we approach 8 o'clock, I would love to wrap up with hearing of any authors or other short story writers that you all really enjoy that you think the audience should look into.
Oh, gosh.
Any of you can start.
I'll start. I love celebrating writers. I love Rebecca Schiff. I love Margaret Malone. Those are two short story collections that are talking about like tight and not having any no baggage there. Michelle Ross has a new collection coming out called Shapeshifting. It's just amazing. She is scary good. She also has I think she's got another book on the heels of that as well. Like, she's on fire. And then of course, like I have to give love to my imaginary boyfriends, Edgar Carrot and Peter Orner, as well, who will not steer you wrong. And yeah, I'm about to review Lily King's new, she's got a story collection, and I've only ever read novels by her, but she can write a story. So anyway, there's so many great stuff out there, and there's so many people. I just want to say this before I know I'm like taking up way too much space here, because I could just gush for a long time. But there are so many writers that I feel so fortunate to be connected with, some of whom have debut collections that they're currently shopping, some of whom have collections that they're currently putting together. And I just am waiting with bated breath for these story collections to come out in the world. So I just feel really lucky to be a part. I know this has been a tough week in the literary community of toxicity. And I just want to say there are some really good people out there who are really talented and doing their thing. And I just can't wait to celebrate all of them.
Yeah, absolutely. KB Carl is one of them. I think she's in the chat. She definitely needs a book. Every time she reads something, Flash or otherwise, I was lucky enough to be in a workshop with her this winter where she's working on this fabulous Flash novel, and death itself is one of the characters. And I would just get on there and read voraciously, like, what next? So I can't wait to shout it from the rooftops, KB, whenever this happens. So no pressure.
I run a small press called Ellipsis Press, and I published, there are 2 short story collections and 2 authors, and they've written other short story collections. They're mostly short story writers, and I think they're incredible. One is, his name is Stephen Paul Martin. The book we published was called Changing the Subject. It's incredibly digressive. It goes here and then, it keeps making left turns. It has a political bent. It's a great book. He also has a book out on FC2. Evelyn Hampton, also, I published a book of hers called Discomfort. Her stories I think of it's a beautiful, beautiful book. I think of those in the kind of lineage, it might be the wrong word, but with Lydia Davis and with Robert Creeley short stories and kind of those kind of experimental language forward. It's Ted Chiang's science fiction short collection. I think one of the best short story collection titles is his, which is The Story of Your Life and Others. It might be The Story of Your Life and Other Stories. I think that's a pretty good title. So those are a few that I would recommend.
I had the pleasure of editing Megan Phillips' chapbook, Abstinence Only, and I feel like she's working on something longer, and whatever it is, I'm here for it. She's a phenomenal flash fiction writer, and I think Abstinence Only will be available for free download. It's sold out. It's like physical copy, but she's phenomenal. I'm a huge fan of Alejandro Varela, who has a novel coming out with Astra House in the spring, but he's also published a lot of phenomenal short fiction, and I believe there's a collection at some point, like post novel, that's supposed to come out. I hope. I think it was a 2-book deal. I'm putting it out there if it wasn't, but I think it was a 2-book deal. He's incredible. And those are the first that come to mind. But Brian Washington's short fiction, Nafisa Thompson Spire's short fiction, Evelise Rodriguez's collection Love War Stories is incredible. I don't know, anyone on this shelf has been incredibly helpful and inspirational for me.
Great. I love that. Thank you all so much. I know we are exactly at 8 o'clock, so really, really, really fast. Would you all go through, tell us where people can find you on the internet, social media, that kind of thing, and any upcoming projects you might have? For example, certain authors in this group that might have pre-orders available, or your most recent release, which Beth and Eugene have both already talked about, but we can go ahead and do that. Chris, do you want to start us off with this?
Yeah, sure. My debut collection, I'm Not Hungry But I Could Eat, is forthcoming with Santa Fe Writers Project December 1st. You can pre-order it pretty much anywhere in ebook, print, and there is going to be an audiobook, which is exciting.
Yes.
Pre-order it from Astoria Bookshop if you haven't yet and you would like to. And then I am available. I'm mostly online all the time at Twitter at Lives and Pages, so I'll just drop that here for people who would care to follow me.
Perfect.
No pressure.
You can find me at Betty Sue Blue. I'm on Instagram and Twitter, and still on the book face as well. For event planning stuff, it makes it easier sometimes, but I don't enjoy it.
I'm at eugenelim.com, and I'm on Twitter, lim_Eugene.
And I waste way too much time of my life on Twitter, and I'll drop my handle. My collection Jerks is available for pre-order. I'll put that link in the chat as well, and that's coming out in March. And thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, you can pre-order those books down there in the link that says buy these books. And thank you all for joining us. Thank you to these authors for being on this panel. A quick preview of events we have coming up in the next week or so. Next week we have a middle grade author, a middle grade graphic novel event on Wednesday. And on Thursday we have a shop talk, which is Aaron H. Aceves series, where he brings in two authors to talk about writing and craft, and that's super fun. And you can RSVP to those on our Crowdcast page here. One more time, buy those books down in the link at the bottom, and thank you all for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Have a great night.
Thank
Thank
you so
you.
much.
It was so much fun.
Thank you all for coming out.